Disassembling an older IKEA Hemnes Daybed. Problems, glue dowels, tools, logistics, success. I'm Joel Weintraub. In 2006, I put together the popular IKEA Daybed kit in a small bedroom, thinking it would be my forever residence. But situations change, isn't that true? And now I was faced with moving the daybed by professional movers to another site about 23 miles away. This is how I did it, and so can you. Let's start off with the size of the bed, using our 2006 receipt. I don't think it included the mattresses. Today, the daybed frame is only $50 more. Isn't that amazing? The weight is not shown, nor is it shown on their current website descriptions. And so there is some of the things. You could always pause this presentation, especially when I have a lot of dense data on the screen. Let me show you a before and after the move pictures. This looks like a standard IKEA daybed, whether from 2006 or 2025. But there are differences in the dowel configurations you will learn about in this video. The Hemnes series daybed is considered a bestseller at IKEA. So here's the photo after the move and reassembly. The process was a success. I didn't destroy the bed. Given the dimensions of the daybed, it could not be moved from the original room intact. If the rolling lower part was detached, that part on its side could fit through the room's narrow door opening. The 3 drawers would be separately moved to lessen the weight of the unit. And so this figure is from the most current assembly manual for the model. I found it online in 2025. Our 2006 receipt for the kit shows that the drawer size were made of particle board, the bottom frame solid pine. So if we look at this figure, 3 of course are the drawers, 1 is the lower moving section, and 2 are the back panels and the wooden slats. And here is a look at the entrance to that room. The length of the lower bed isn't a problem to get through there, and the bed could be tilted through the doorway. And at the end, at my back, at the end there's a right turn at the end of the hallway that could be maneuvered. If the upper slats and their front metal rail could be removed from the attached back and side panels, then possibly the panels as a unit could be angled through the room's large window. But if that was done, one might as well try to remove and separate the 3 panels. I think that was how the floor workers we hired to renovate the room moved the daybed to the patio. I remember them struggling to go through the open window. I wish I had paid more attention. Therefore, this video's partial deassembly is probably the second for this daybed since it was built. So here's a figure of the back structure, but still with its front metal rail and the 2 upper end slats. You shouldn't have to remove the metal rail, I'll point that out to you here, on the back panel before your move. And so here's a look at the large window there, but still not quite sure how they got the workers got the daybed through it. And this is a single-story house. I went online to see if there was some advice about this. There are a number of online YouTube videos on assembling this daybed, but much less information on how to disassemble it. Some people suggested just repeat the assembly instructions, but in reverse order for the move. So that would mean you need the assembly instructions. If you don't have the 2016, 2018 instructions, they are online, and I'm showing you the address there. I'm also going to show you the address in the show notes. All the resources will be in the show notes. So warning number 1. I found at the end of my Daybed disassembly project that my 2006 built structure did not entirely line up with the recent Daybed instructions and figures. I'll discuss the important differences later. But for efficiency, it seems better to reduce the daybed to just a few manageable pieces, not all the original parts. One online essay on how to do it for an IKEA Hemnes bed frame, a different sort of model than what we're dealing with here, but it's useful for my project, can be found at that address shown below. So again, it's going to be in the show notes. Warning 2, and this is a quote from that article shown on the bottom. It says, although most IKEA furniture is flat pack furniture, it's not designed to be disassembled after you assemble it for the first time. After you disassemble and reassemble a piece of furniture, the quality of the product can be degraded by creating more space between screw holes and parts than originally existed. Now this fiberboard shown on our original receipt, that may be difficult to maintain tight screw holes with multiple assemblies and disassemblies. The second problem is that the disassembly is going to be done with a 82-year-old person, and then he's going to also have to reassemble it a couple of days later with very little help. So planning was important for the disassembly. Does this person look like they can, on their own, do that? Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? It's not confidence building to see in the online manual that they don't recommend a person, one person, do the assembly of it, certainly the disassembly as well. But there are workarounds I found for one person that I will show you. A third problem is that a number of years ago, the panel moldings of my daybed, and I'll define what that means, held by dowels were continually becoming loose. So I glued the dowels to reinforce the joint on the top of the panels. That's not a problem, but I dimly remember gluing other dowels as well when I put together the kit. That became a worry for me in the pre-planning phase. So here I can see evidence on the panel from the glue used to fix the loose molding, but I worried about other possible glued areas. So here is the back panel, and then on top of it, we'll call that the panel molding, which is put on over dowels. After taking apart the daybed and seeing some unexpected dowel configurations on the panel molding, I asked my wife Gloria, who keeps a file of home improvements, whether she retained the early manual. And she did. She did. That opened a can of worms about glued dowels. And that's when I started searching online about that situation. I'll later show you some of the 2004 manual material that was actually used in 2006. There's nothing in the recent IKEA Daybed assembly manual which shows gluing of dowels. That doesn't mean that you can't do it. Since there is no text descriptions there, but cartoon figures, if IKEA didn't want users to glue, they could have added a picture of a glue bottle with a dowel receiving glue and a large X over it, as they did for other situations IKEA didn't want assemblers to do. And so you'll see this in the assembly manuals often. Don't sit on the back side of the slats. It is going to give. That metal railing in the front is really pretty weak. But you don't see that for glue. There are comments online on whether or not to glue IKEA dowels, with most writers stating that it shouldn't be done for large pieces of furniture, especially if you're planning to move them in the future. Smaller items might be where gluing dowels could be advantageous and lead to more rigid structures. In case I did glue the dowels almost 20 years ago between the back panel and the side panels, I prepared for the worst. Those dowels shown next, and I'll show you the figure where they are, were the ones I thought I might have trouble with in the disassembly. But stay tuned, they're not the ones. There's actually another group. So here are the side panels, and you can see the dowels are put in those holes there. There are 6 of them, and those are the ones I wondered whether I had glued or not, and would make it difficult to separate from the back panel. I put together, because I was worried that I would have to do something about those dowels, a very thin saw, a hacksaw blade, a putty knife, chisels, Dremel, drill sets, and more, so that I could cut through the dowel at the junction of panels if needed. I also considered drilling through the area of the back side panels where I thought that the dowel went through to separate the joint, and then drill out the remaining dowel bodies and replace them with new dowels of a larger size. Luckily, I didn't have to do any of that, as you will find out. But since we were downsizing to go from a larger house to a small one, I managed to salvage some of my tools, just an excuse for that to some extent, and I put together kind of a kit that might cut through a dowel. Also note here thin pieces of wood on the right, including some coffee stirrers that you can put in a screw hole that is just too wide, and then that will hold the screw when you put it in. It's to strengthen screw holes. There's also wood glue there, my own dowels from IKEA, lots of things. Here is a close-up of some of these very thin saw blades, and in fact there's something called a microtome blade below, which is a very large blade that I thought I could hammer through a stubborn dowel and cut it in half if I can get to it. I was prepared if a chunk of the panel came out to reconstruct it. I bought a 3-in-1 repair stick, so-called white for repairs, and a good wood glue. I also saved some sawdust for use, just in case. I had a number of small clamps, and the panel is made of some sort of a particle board or fiber board situation there, certainly not solid wood. And so against the front of the catalog, I saved a bunch of sawdust would mix with glue, could fill holes. There is the repair stick I got. I read that IKEA uses Posidrive PZ screws, which can be turned with a Phillips screwdriver, but use of Phillips type bits could reduce the useful life of these IKEA screws, which are prone to stripping using that driver. So I bought sets of PZ driver bits to be safe. I also had the original IKEA wrench. And so here's a bunch of other tools I put together. A hand-operated ratchet screwdriver, some other things which I've used on this project. And then the original wrenches from IKEA. I also had sets of other screwdriver bits and screw extractors just in case. One of the bolts that attached the side panel to the back panel could not easily be rotated with the IKEA wrench, but my bit with the markings CR-TV25 did the trick. And so here is really nice to have a set of these, and the one that seemed to work on that reluctant bolt is on the upper left. I also got some extra Daybed parts. IKEA will send you free replacement parts for their furniture, and I show you the address there. It's also in the show notes. So I got some extra dowels and slat screws, wood slat screws this way. The bolts for the crossbar to the side rails were out of stock at IKEA, and it turns out that Amazon has a lot of these parts. All the parts have a number on them, and you can get them potentially that way or even on eBay. And so they came in plastic bags. There are the IKEA dowels. We'll actually show measurements of them at the end, and some other parts. So let's actually dive into the disassembly, stage 1. Well, obviously you want to remove the bedding and mattresses. Then you got to figure out where to put them in a small room. And you would like to it was kind of a logistical nightmare. Remove the 3 drawers next to reduce the weight. I should have noted on the back of the drawers whether they were from the left, middle, or right side, so I could put them back where they were, quote, comfortable. Suggested that if they work, then don't rock the boat. Put them back the way you remove them. I found that one of the drawers jammed pretty close to its opening. Eventually, I looked more closely at the problem, and one of the screws had loosened that held the drawer's slide. Once I tightened that, it solved the problem. I also saw on the floor beneath the daybed remnants of caster wheel treads. I ordered new wheels through IKEA's free material website, but they didn't arrive before the dismantling and reconstruction of the daybed. Perhaps I'll replace them in my next move in about 3 months. You know, it's a long story of eventually 4 full or partial moves from January through June 2025 that we're going through. And so here we see the broken treads that I found. All 8 wheels were eventually had these broken treads. And there's some of the brand new casters that are waiting to be put on the lower daybed. So the next thing we need to do is to slide out the bottom to separate the back from the front. And one needs to overcome the upper stop metal piece on the upper end slats to fully accomplish this task. The assembly manual shows this step needs 2 people. Lifting the front of the left and right panels and moving the lower structure out of the daybed is what is needed for disassembly. Of course, the assembly manual is to move that moving part into the daybed back. So here is from the manual, you can see the upper end slats, wooden slats with this metal stop. And so here we see from the manual that takes 2 people. One hand is lifting the front of the back of the daybed, and then the right side is moving the front section on its casters. But in our case, we're doing the opposite. We're trying to get it out of the bed. So how could I figure out how to do that without the other person? I had looked to see if an angled screwdriver could undo the screws holding the metal stop, but there wasn't enough space. However, by using a furniture lifter from a caster or slider set and placing a small block of wood under the very front of the side panel, I found I had enough height gain on the upper front for clearance for the lower moving unit to exit the daybed. So it was really pretty easy to do. And so these are our lifters with leverage, and there is some wood blocks from some spare wood I had. So it's a 2x2 block. At this point, I wrote on the slats B for bottom, number, that is bottom slats, and then the number of the slat from left to right, just in case they somehow were separated from the frame, and that I can replace them in the order that they were before I dismantled the bed. To provide some rigidity to the lower part for transit, especially the slat section, I bolted a wood strip over the front slats. I didn't do a great job of placing the holes in the wood strip, so I cut the strip into two to be able to use more aligned holes to the metal rail. That's what they're going to be bolted to. I should have put a strip on both sides. The bolts were 1/4 20 by 1.5 inch hex head screw bolts with nuts, flat washers, and spring lock washer. I would have been better off with a 1 3/4 inch bolt if they make them, or even a 2 inch. The bolts went through the holes in the metal rail, not used by the lower wood slats. So to be clear, there were no holes drilled in the slats for this clamp. So here you can see the wooden slats. You can see the bolts. You notice the bolts are lined up in between the wooden slats, and underneath them are the rails, and so the bolt is going through the rails. Don't mess with the slats, the wood slats. And this is the hardware used. Stage 3, the upper slats. I wrote on the upper slats their position as well using T number even before I removed them, top slats and number from left to right. I then proceeded to remove the screws and upper slats using a power drill and then the PZ bits. I put the screws in a labeled Ziploc bag. That's important. Labeled Ziploc bag. There were peg-like slat attachments remained on the wood slats. They're pretty firmly in there. The slats were put in two piles and the ends wrapped with plastic elastic, so that even then the pegs would stay put. I then removed the upper metal cross-front bar or rail, eventually transporting it and the slats to the new residence. So I didn't trust that to the movers, or they were excellent, but I decided that that was a crucial part of the reconstruction. I would transport that themselves. So this is what these pegs look like. This is from the manual. You see all these parts have a number on them, and they are put in one end of the wood slats. So here we're looking at the upper part. I'm going to have to remove all those wood slats. So to help the removal of the slats by a power drill, I brace the rail with a T brace, as you can see. Notice the slats are placed on this side under the railing. It was sometimes a little difficult when I reassembled it to line up the screw on top with a corresponding slat hole underneath, as you will find out. The other side of the slats, the wood slats, where their downward facing pegs are placed above the rail. And so it's important to look at the manual and figure out how you're going to attach these wood slats to the rails. And of course the slat screws go in their own Ziploc bag. The top front rail has 4 screws. They go in their own Ziploc bag. And then finally I can remove this metal rail from the upper part. It's now lying on the lower part. And you may notice that I put some plastic over the slats, kind of like a ribbon. I'm not sure it did anything to keep them safe. It would have been better if I had another wood strip clamp. And you can see the holes now between the wood slats that the bolts went through. And then the upper slats, I put them together with the elastic plastic, and they're ready to go to the new residence. And they went by car to the new residence. And you can see now the panels are to the right. The side panels are there. So it's going to be crowded to reassemble this and break it down. You got to figure out where all these parts are going to go. Stage 4. Next, I worked on the attached right, back, and left panels. I wanted to separate them. I removed the 2 bolts and nuts, and you can see with that fancy looking thing, I'll call that a nut. between the back and each side panel into their own Ziploc bag, of course. I use the IKEA hand wrench and the previously mentioned special screwdriver bit on one of the bolts to remove the bolt. That is a major thing that keeps the panels together, even though there are dowels between them. So they go in their own Ziploc bag. So using a wooden mallet, the sort for woodworking, I use the mallet to hit a thin wooden plank against the sides of the panel where the dowels should be, but they of course are hidden, working both sides of where the dowels were and applying a little more punch each mallet hit, and the panels separated. They separated. Wow, I captured that on film. I'll show you that next. So I didn't have to use all those tools. I subsequently had proof that the panel moldings were glued to each other and to the top of the panels by dowels, independent of my fix. I must have done that initial gluing 20 years ago when I assembled the unit. What did I do that? The 6 panel dowels which I was worried about were not glued. So here's my trusty wooden mallet. And this is what I call a wood plank. It fitted very nicely to the exposed areas that had the dowels. So what I planned if no separation, because I gave a lot of thought to this, even if I didn't use it. If I couldn't separate the panels with the wooden mallet hits, my next step would have been to apply heat. That's been suggested, and sometimes it works. But usually they use a commercial device to create high heat. All I would have would be a hairdryer, but it would be worth a try, to the areas of the dowels, hoping to break down the glue, and try again to pound the panels apart. If that didn't work, I would have been more aggressive in trying to actually break the dowel's integrity with the tools I accumulated. To help daybed owners if they disassemble their IKEA daybed from the 2000s, because the later ones don't have this problem, and run into glued dowels, I show measurements at the end of this video where the molding dowels were on my daybed. And we'll talk about that in more detail. And of course, your dimensions might differ, but it's, looking at the daybeds, they look pretty similar over the years. So when I did separate the parts, the panels, there were more dowels exposed from the separation of the panels in my daybed than I expected from the recent online assembly instructions. There are actually 4 more dowels. That's interesting. Wow, what's going on there? We'll see that in a second. So before I do discuss these 4 extra dowels, I'll look at the dowel situation in this area from the recent online assembly manual. Remember, this is not my unit, but this would be a more recent one. So remember, I showed you this before. The side panels have 3 dowels put in there. There are 2 more holes there, as you see. Those are for the bolts. In addition to that, there are dowels on the top of the left, middle, or back and right sides. But the interesting thing is that this is a different number. This is a different number dowel than the ones I've just showed you. It has a different number on it. That's very interesting. See, compare the 2. The one on the right is a wooden dowel, and the one on the left I thought was a wooden dowel. I had no experience with it except through the manual. And you can see one other thing here, that what's interesting is that these dowels around the top of the panels were pounded in. You don't see that in the instructions for the wooden dowel. So they're kind of designed to grab very strongly once they're in place, and the panel molding goes on top of them, So I found online the special dowels on eBay that had the same IKEA number, and they're made of plastic. Interesting, plastic dowels. And these dowels are not just for alignment for the parts. These are actually for structural integrity. Okay, I hope you don't hear that plane coming over. And then what happens is, according to the recent one, that these moldings are individually put on the panels. There's a right and left situation here shown in number 14 to keep it straight, but the moldings are not connected to each other. They are connected to the panel. Okay, so that's clear. Now let's look more closely at the dowel placement on the actual panel moldings from my separated panels. And remember, this is a 2006 Daybed. And then see the 2004 Daybed manual. So the molding itself has, look, it has two more dowel positions to connect to the middle dowel. So let me emphasize that with you here. So first of all, we have the bolt holes. That's fine. Then we have the dowel positions. Those are the 6 that I've mentioned before. But then on the top, we have 4 more dowels. 4 more dowels. So what do they do? Now, here's a close-up of a side panel with 3 dowels and the bolt hole. Note the remnants of glue around the top dowels, but not the bottom one. Now, some of it may be because of my fix when it became loose, but a lot of it is from what I did a number of years ago. Here is a look at the dowel holes on the back panel molding, and then there's the bolt hole of the panel. This was taken with flash, so it almost looks like there is a dowel there on the bottom. You can see that there's remnants of glue on the top. Now, one of the back panel molding end showed some damage. I don't know if it happened during the separation. The molding is not a weight-bearing part of the daybed, so I left it alone during the reassembly. But the next time, in a couple of months, when I move again, I will have to go through the same procedure, and I might do something about this, such as take the dowel, the opposite one that you don't see, from that hole and glue it in here with strong glue, and see if I can remove the other dowel that you do see, and then reinsert it with strong glue. That would hopefully stop this fracture of the wood, although it may only be surface deep. So now let's look at the 2004 IKEA Hemnes manual and these 4 extra dowels and the other panel molding dowels, all the same type, and all asked to be glued in. This may be a surprise for some people out there who claim that IKEA dowels never should be glued. Why are they glued? But wait, if glued, how did I separate the 3 panels? I'm not actually sure. Perhaps the glue wasn't of great strength and was used to facilitate disassembly of the panels. But remember, I had to reglue the panel moldings because the original glue didn't anymore provide a strong bond between the panels and the moldings. Again, an indication maybe that the glue wasn't very strong. But also remember that this daybed was removed from the room when the floor was converted to a wood plank surface by the workers, and I don't remember how they got it through the room's window. They may have partially disassembled it. So the glued dowel joints may have been weakened by that process. I'm not sure. If you have information on how easy or hard it was to separate the glued dowel parts of a 2000s daybed, please add that information to the comment section of this video. So let's actually look at this manual from 2004. I searched online to see if there were assembly instruction manuals between my copy dated 2004 on the back cover and the online instructions you can find today with the date of 2016 and 2018 for the Daybed, and could not find a copy. It would be nice to see when changes were made to the Daybed over time, when those 4 extra dowels were stopped, and where the plastic dowels were done instead. So I scanned the 2004 manual and put it on my Dropbox account. And the public URL for this, it's a free site, free file, shows there. It's also in the resource sections. So let me show you it. So first of all, here's a list of all the parts. You notice there's only the wooden dowels, none of the plastic dowels. And then what's that on the bottom as part of the kit? What is that? What is that thing? And it's a special package, and we find out it's glue. So IKEA provides glue, says, hey, glue the dowels at the end of the molding in the middle of the back molding, and also glue the other end and then put them together. So effectively, we're creating a rigid structure. Instead of having 3 moldings, we now have basically 1. Then it further uses this glue to put glue on all the dowels on the top of the panels, both ends, so that when the molding is put on top of it, it's glued, it's fastened to the panels. It's not just a positioning the molding, it's a structural use of wooden dowels. And they've gone away from that using the plastic ones. So people online who said that IKEA never recommends gluing dowels are probably experiencing a rude shock right now. They also can't accuse us of not reading the manual, can they? As one person did, saying, oh, that's the reason why you glued it. You're kind of stupid. You didn't read the manual. Well, I'm going to send that person a link to a copy of the manual so he can retract his statements. And then you can see here it's a single unit is now put on top of the panels. So this is going to make it a little bit difficult to break it down. Interesting. And I think that's another argument, and it's a speculation, that the glue they used was not that strong enough to hold the moldings, but not strong enough to withstand a sharp hit with a mallet. So I have 2 observations, maybe speculations, that gluing the molding dowels made the 3 moldings and the 3 panels one rigid piece and would make disassembly difficult. Could a weak glue reduce the difficulty? And then not gluing non-molding dowels in the assembly indicated to me that those dowels were only used for part orientation rather than structural use. Other hints, other ideas. I took pictures of how my 2025 disassembly of parts were proceeding, so it would be easier to reassemble the parts if I ran into trouble and the manual didn't help. So what do I end up with? What traveled on the moving van? With the three drawers, the rolling lower pin with slats and my clamp, the back panel, the 2 sides panel. I moved the cross metal rail of the back area. I moved the wooden slats of the back area by car, and then all the hardware in Ziploc bags, which I moved myself separately, not in the moving van. So, on March 3rd, on the van, on 2025, I didn't take too many pictures that day. It was pretty hectic. The movers didn't need me hovering around them snapping pictures, and I respected their privacy, so I don't have too many. But you can see that they've stabilized the front part, have using these kind of blankets. The mattresses are there as well. and I also think on the right is one of the panels all in a mattress. And so here is the panel entering the front door incognito, and that's how they wrapped them, very carefully. I had marked where the daybed would be in the new place and where the lower part should be left, so I could have space to reassemble the daybed. So the square on the top is where the completed daybed would be, and then I with green painter's tape showed them, hey, I want the front part to be put, between those two greens and not in that space, because I needed that space. And so I brought in all the material. I had to figure out the logistics. And here I'm joining two panels together by placing the back panel on the lower bed and raising the back of the side panel with two sliders so that the holes were about the same level. But I didn't need some help stabilizing the back panel. The trick was to align the lowest dowel to its respective hole and then align the others and hit the side panels to close the gap between it and the back panel. So a lot of those dowels were really useful to align parts here. And then once I got the panels together and bolted them, I started to put the slats back. Well, obviously first I had to put the railing back, but the slats were being reattached. The front end of the slats screwed into place from below the rail to the metal rail. The top of the slats fitted with a black peg to the top of the back railing. The folded towels I used to protect my knees. Those are my knee protectors. The manual was there, so I could see what's going on. Okay. So location measurements of my 2006 IKEA Daybed back unit dowels, because it's important, to see where those are, and the bolt holes are after the next slide, in case you have to actually break through those dowels. I hope you never have to do that, and I also hope that my measurements resemble your measurements. So there's a warning, a caveat there. So normally I would end my talk. Remember, there's some more information after this that tell you that this is another of my JDW talks. I have talks mainly in genealogy, so you might be interested in finding yourself or your parents or your grandparents, if they were around in 1950, using census material. I have a lot of useful information there. That's what I'm best known for, even though I am a PhD biologist. I have a number of YouTube videos on natural history topics. I have etc. videos like novelties of the biology songs, and now I've added IKEA Daybed Disassembly. I have over 950 subscribers. If you like this video, and I don't expect to make another one like this, but others, please subscribe. That would be my thank you. Your thank you for me. So here is where the measurements are. I measured where the dowels were in relationship to the bolt holes by a number of instruments: a digital caliper, a millimeter ruler, and then I decided, well, I don't think you need that high a specificity, and I wasn't. Every time I did it, I got slightly different numbers. So instead, I decided the distances I'd show you with a ruler with markings of 1/64 of an inch. The metal ruler was hard to photograph unless I got the right angle or used flash, and even then it was difficult. So these are the best photos of many taken. So here is the wood IKEA dowels, and you can figure out the measurements there. Remember, you can stop at any time and then take a look at these, even print out these pictures. This is the top molding for the back panel. You can see their gaffer's tape is holding the ruler. I tried very hard to make sure that the ruler was in line with the edge of what I was measuring. And here are the two dowels on the side of the side rails molding. You can see there. Here is the bolt hole on the left and the first dowel of a side panel. Note the distance from the first bolt hole to the first dowel is the same distance of the second bolt hole to the third dowel. Here is the second dowel going to the bolt hole to the right. So I've shown you where the first dowel is in relationship to the first bolt hole. Now I'm showing you where the second dowel is in relationship to the second bolt hole. And then finally, I'm showing you on the left, and even though it doesn't look it, that is a bolt hole. The flash makes it look funny. That is a bolt hole to the third dowel on the right, to give you some things. All right, good luck on your disassembly project, especially those who have older IKEAs, daybeds. I hope you have success, and I hope to see the comments of how you managed to do it. Bye-bye.